Welcome to America's Beat, the history of music in the States. I'm Ashlyn, and I'm excited for this very first episode I have for you. If you haven't already, follow this podcast on Twitter at America's Beat. There, you can be notified on upcoming episodes, take a look at behind-the-scenes content, and have conversations with me about the topics I cover. If you like what you hear, feel free to live tweet while listening today to help promote America's Beat. So today, we will be discussing the background on a couple popular patriotic songs that you may know that were created during the American Revolution, as well as from the Civil War. So, without further ado, go ahead, sit down, stay a while, and let's talk about some music history. Travel back with me to an earlier time in the United States, starting with the Revolutionary War. Anyone who has had a deep love and appreciation for music will know just how influential it can be to people's lives. It makes us feel things. It can bring cheer, it can bring pain, it can reflect disgust or honor, as well as an innumerable amount of other emotions. So it should be no surprise to hear that the songs that arose around the time of America's War for Independence were no different in elevating morale for soldiers during the war, as well as offer an enjoyable pastime for families at home. While the popular songs of today tend to reflect ideas or feelings, a majority of the patriotic songs during this time frame often told a story, sometimes having a political agenda. The authors of these songs did not compose the music themselves per se, but rather copied tunes from existing songs and just changed the lyrics. One such song that can be considered the first American patriotic song would be the Liberty Song. It was written in 1768, and it helped rally a sense of American patriotism before the Revolution. It also coined the popular phrase, "By uniting we stand, by dividing we fall."
Then join hand in hand, brave Americans all. By uniting we stand, by dividing we fall. In so righteous a cause let us hope to succeed. For heaven approves of each generous deed. In freedom we're born, and in freedom we live. Our purses are ready. Steady, boys, steady. Not as slaves, but as freemen our money will give.
John Dickinson wrote the Liberty Song in response to the Townshend Acts of 1767, which were one of the series of taxes put on the American colonies. And, we know how everyone felt about that, all those taxes. Arthur Lee, who was a friend of Dickinson's, wrote two of the stanzas. If you don't know who John Dickinson was, because honestly, I hadn't heard of him before researching this song, he was one of the founding fathers who was named the penman of the Revolution because he wrote down a lot of the ideas for the formation of our new nation. So the song was simply one of his many political writings. The tune to his song was set to Dr. William Boyce's song Heart of Oak, which was and still is the anthem of the British Royal Navy, and it's also the anthem of the Royal Canadian Navy as well. This particular song was most likely chosen specifically due to its connotation of patriotism and pride for the British Navy, and then using it instead to invoke those feelings towards the American identity. A subtlety embedded in the name of the song is that Liberty was the name of John Hancock's ship, which was seized for smuggling, which that in turn led to riots and a suspension of imports from England to Boston in 1768. So that could have been a part of why he named it Liberty Song. The Boston Gazette first published the song in July of 1768, and then again in the Boston Chronicle that August. The clip that you listened to a moment ago was part of the album Birth of Liberty, Music of the American Revolution, with the artists Cheryl Milnes and John Spong, that was released in 1996. Currently, the Dickinson College Archives and Special Collections holds a print copy of the article that was in the Boston Chronicle. Moving on from the War for Independence just a bit, we come to the Civil War to a short song many should be familiar with. Originally created to be a lights-out call in the military, it continues to be played at every U.S. military funeral across the nation, and then, of course, at night in the barracks to signify the end of the day. Only 24 notes make up the entirety of the song, approximately 2 lines of notation, yet its impact resonates deep emotion within the hearts of its listeners. Now, I know it's considered more of a bugle call than a song you would sing to, but I mean, it has sheet music, it has notes, it carries a message, and it invokes an emotion, and for me, that suffices enough to be a song. Before the Civil War, the song Tactics by Silas Casey was used for Lights Out until Union General Daniel Butterfield changed it for Taps because he felt Tactics was too formal to end the day. Oliver Wilcox Norton, a brigade bugler, played taps at the command of Butterfield after the 7 Days Battle to honor their men in 1862. Since that evening, when they sounded the call, it spread to the other Union Army units and found its way into the Confederate Army as well. When the war ended, it became an official bugle call. In researching the story behind taps, or lights out as the Army drill manuals called it, there is some misinformation that's been thrown around. The fact that Butterfield is the one who actually wrote taps in the first place. Master Sergeant Yari Villanueva, hopefully I'm pronouncing his name correctly, wrote about the history of taps on the website of the Association of the United States Army to correct this misinformation. If you saw my Twitter, I posted a link to NPR's interview with him earlier. In response to an article written by Gustav Kobe about the origin of taps, Oliver Norton wrote a letter in 1898 on how he knew this origin, and I will read some parts of his letter now. It reads as follows. I was much interested in reading the article by Mr. Gustav Kobe on the trumpet and bugle calls in the August century. Mr. Kobe says that he has been unable to trace the origin of the call now used for taps, or the go to sleep as it is generally called by the soldiers. During the early part of the Civil War, I was bugler at the headquarters of Butterfield's brigade. Up to July 1862, the infantry call for taps was that set down in Casey's Tactics, which Mr. Kobe says was borrowed from the French. One day, soon after the 7 Days battles on the Peninsula, when the Army of the Potomac was lying in camp at Harrison's Landing, General Daniel Butterfield, then commanding our brigade, sent for me, and showing me some notes on a staff written in pencil on the back of an envelope, asked me to sound them on my bugle. I did this several times, playing the music as written. He changed it somewhat, lengthening some notes and shortening others, but retaining the melody as he first gave it to me. After getting it to his satisfaction, he directed me to sound that call for taps thereafter in place of the regulation call. I did not presume to question General Butterfield at the time, but from the manner in which the call was given to me, I have no doubt he composed it in his tent at Harrison's Landing. General Butterfield also wrote a letter, and here is his side of the matter. The facts are that at the time I could sound calls on the bugle as a necessary part of military knowledge and instruction for an officer commanding a regiment or brigade. I had acquired this as a regimental commander. The men rather liked their call and began to sing my name to it. It was 3 notes and a catch. I cannot write a note of music, but I have gotten my wife to write it from my whistling to her. I called in someone who could write music and practice a change in the call of taps until I had it suit my ear, and then, as Norton writes, got it to my taste without being able to write music or knowing the technical name of any note, but simply by ear, arranged it as Norton describes. I do not recall him in a connection with it, but his story is substantially correct. Now, obviously these two stories conflict one another. What actually was really happening, long story short, was that Taps was a revision Butterfield did of another Lights Out call, Tattoo. There are 2 versions of this call. The first referred to as Scott Tattoo, and the second coming into use just before the Civil War. The second one replaced the first version, which could be the reason Norton thought taps was a brand new call and didn't recognize it at a modified version of Scott Tattoo, the first one. Taps and the second tattoo were both played to end the day on both sides of the war. Taps was first used during a funeral when Captain John C. Tidball had it played for a cannoneer that was killed in action in 1862. He did this because he was concerned with the enemy being so close and that the traditional 3 shots fired in the air might resume the fighting. So instead, he ordered taps to be played. Now, the first official reference to the mandatory use of taps at military funerals was in 1891, but the tradition was already instilled before that. Words to the call were added with many versions, the first being "go to sleep, go to sleep." So, long story short, even though Butterfield did not actually write Taps as a new song, he still was influential in its creation. Moving on to the final song we'll be discussing is one you might consider to be more popularly sung in churches, the Battle Hymn of the Republic. William Steff is accredited with authoring its tune and original lyrics around 1856 as a Methodist camp meeting song called "Say Brothers, Will You Meet Us?"
Say, brothers, will you meet us? Say, brothers, will you meet us? Say, brothers, will you meet us on Canaan's happy shore? Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Forever, evermore.
Its popularity started in the Charleston, South Carolina region, as well as being utilized for marching in the army. New lyrics were added after abolitionist John Brown's revolt at Harper's Ferry in 1856. Now, I won't get into the details about what happened, but essentially he tried to raid weapons and supplies from Harper's Ferry for a slave revolt, but it was unsuccessful and he ended up being executed. The lines, "John Brown's body lies a moldering in the grave, his soul is marching on," were added to the lyrics to those who celebrated Brown's actions. John Brown's Body, as the song came to be called, was very popular as a marching song within the Union forces.
John Brown's body lies a mouldering in the grave. John Brown's body lies a mouldering in the grave. John Brown's body lies a mouldering in the grave. His soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His soul is marching on. The stars of heaven are a-looking kindly down. The stars of heaven are a-looking kindly down. The stars of heaven are a-looking kindly down on the grave of old John Brown.
Coincidentally, there apparently was a Scottish sergeant also named John Brown, whom the song was also ribbing. Confederate troops, in an attempt to mock the abolitionist John Brown, created their own variation with lyrics, "John Brown's hanging on a sour apple tree." The Northern Army then bantered back with, "They will hang Jeff Davis on a sour apple tree." Jefferson Davis, of course, being the president of the Confederate States. Eventually, Julia Ward Howe was inspired by a visit to Washington, D.C. in 1861 to write a poem. This poem, published in the Atlantic Monthly in 1862, was then set to the tune of John Brown's Body and became the Battle Hymn of the Republic that we know of today. Well, I hope you're able to keep up with all that information. If you're like me, hopefully you found it fascinating, or at least made you want to look into these songs some more. The Liberty Song, Taps, and Battle Hymn of the Republic, because I certainly did not include everything, and there is still a whole lot more information that I could have included here that I didn't. Thank you for listening, and again, make sure you're following the Twitter handle America's Beat to stay up to date on new episodes, or leave me feedback on what you like about my content. Respectfully, of course. Have a great rest of your day, and see you next time.